It's the Health in the Real World podcast. It's time to start the show with Chris Janke as your host. Here to give you everything that you need when it comes to fitness strategies. We keep it simple and easy. It's your roadmap to get healthy. You don't need equipment and you don't need a gym. Just the right strategies to get you fit and trim.
The Health in the Real World podcast is sponsored by...
Hi, this is Chris Janke, host of the Health in the Real World podcast. When I'm not interviewing podcast guests, I'm training and teaching fitness to my wonderful clients. If you don't have a trainer, coach, or teacher who's helping you with your fitness, text me and I can get you started for free. Text WORKOUT to 408-883-4442. Hello and welcome to Health in the Real World. I'm Chris Janke and I'm joined today by Jane Duncan Rogers of Before I Go Solutions. And we're going to have maybe a tough conversation, maybe not, but it's definitely a conversation that most people are not thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So Jane, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I want to start by letting you introduce a little bit more background about you, including how you got into this. It's not necessarily something that, when we're like 10-year-old kids, we're saying, what I want to do is help people with this conversation. How did you get into this and a little bit more background about what you do?
Sure. Well, my background is in the coaching and counseling consulting field. So I've been doing that for about 25 years. And then my husband, who was also a psychotherapist, he was suddenly diagnosed with stomach cancer. And before we knew it, a year later, he had died. Now, in that last year, which was quite a challenging one, as you can imagine, we were sent an email by a friend, and she had to send that same email 3 times because we didn't want to answer what was in it, because she wanted us to answer these questions. And the questions were things like, what are your passwords? How do you want your body dressed? What kind of coffin do you want? I mean, really, really plain speaking things. And we didn't want to do it. So we put it off. But eventually I said, we have to do this because she will just be on our back if we don't do this. So we sat up in bed one Saturday morning and I asked Philip the questions and he gave me his answers. And do you know what? We actually had a good time doing it. I know that sounds completely mad. The subject was his end of life, but it felt like we were doing a project together and we felt so close and we were so intimate somehow with each other. It was just lovely, really lovely. So I wrote about that in my first book, which was published about 2.5 years after Philip had died. And it was this chapter in the book, Gifted by Grief, which people responded to. In the space of about a week, I had maybe 10 people saying to me, oh my goodness, I need to answer these questions too. So eventually I'm like, okay, right. The universe is telling me something here. I better obey. And I just put on a local workshop here locally. I'm in the north of Scotland. There's not loads of people here, but, we had 12 people and another 12 on a waiting list. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'd better do this. And basically that is how we started. And that was 5.5 years ago now. So, it was not something that was planned, as you can imagine. Nobody ever planned for death happening. And I knew that I would write about it because I'd been writing a blog, and writing for me is a creative expression. And I knew it'd be part of my healing journey, but I couldn't have imagined what would happen as a result.
Right. And it's an interesting topic, right? I mean, we all know it's coming, but nobody necessarily is just going to sit down and plan it. And that's a fascinating story that you and your husband sat down and it was like a bonding and intimate moment for you guys. So Jane, what is somebody watching this? What are the first few steps? Now you mentioned like passwords and, how you want to be buried and things like that. Yeah. What are some other things that somebody can do to just, I don't know. For me, this seems like something that, okay, let's address this and just put it on the shelf and now we're done. Right. Yeah. And I don't really have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly what you can do. But there's quite a lot more to it, to a good end of life plan than people realize. The things that people know about are the will. And if you haven't got a will, of course, I'm going to tell you, you need to get one. But the reason, why do you need to do any of this? It's because if you haven't experienced the death of somebody really close to you, then you may not have experienced how utterly discombobulating it the grief is. And you can't think straight. You don't want to think straight anyway. All you care about is that you want that person to come back, and preferably in a healthy state, all of which is impossible. So to have to deal with extra administration, which is what is involved, and extra expense, not a good idea, when you're in that state, is horrible, really horrible. So what we need to do here before it's too late is think ahead, plan ahead, take care of our relatives or our friends or whoever it is that we're responsible for. And by the way, if you have children under 18, this is really crucial that you get a will, because if you and the mother or the father of the child are not around for whatever reason, then, and it's not put down in your will who you want to be a guardian for them, then people whom you don't know will take decisions. Not a good idea. Okay. So lots of people don't know that, but that's what will happen. So anyway, the funeral plan is something else that people have heard of. We've heard of the words wills and funeral, we're relatively comfortable with, but actually there's more important things, I think, which are the powers of attorney, are the legal documents that give people the right to act as if they were you, to speak as if they were you, if you can't speak for yourself. Now, I don't want to be gloomy about this, because this is why people don't want to talk about it. It's like nobody wants to imagine that they're not going to be here in the future. So usually what I say is, well, imagine that, for some reason you had suddenly died yesterday. What kind of state would you be leaving your family in? What, would they be able to manage? Would they know where to find any documentation? Would they know what to do? So those things put in place beforehand are really useful. And then again, from the many people who have told me about when somebody has died out of the blue and it hasn't been planned for, well, of course, it's never planned for, if you like, but it hasn't been thought about. Things like knowing what that person wanted in their funeral, knowing the songs that they want, knowing whether they wanted to be buried or cremated or any of the other choices these days, which there are other choices these days, believe it or not. You can actually get your body composted. Who knew?
Oh,
it's
wow.
New. It's a new thing. It's like,
help the planet.
I know there's lots of new initiatives going on, and that's what we educate people about. So those sorts of things can make a big difference. It's a great solace to somebody who's grieving, and they have to take care of the body, because there will be a body left over, to know what that person would have wanted. It's actually a source of comfort at a time which is horrible. And then the practical things. I mean, passwords, we don't want to have happen what happened to a colleague of mine, Caroline, whose friend died. She was 52. She just had a heart attack out of the blue. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And her mum, she didn't, the woman who died didn't have a family or anything. So her mum was the one who was responsible. Her mum couldn't get into her phone. She couldn't even easily get into the contacts of her daughter to let everybody know. It was like, imagine how distressing that is. And it's because we haven't thought about it in advance. And same with social media, these days we have a lot of photographs and all sorts of things on social media. If you want somebody else to be able to access that after you've died, you need to set it up in advance. It's not difficult to do, but we have to think about it. So thinking about it is a bit more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. That thinking about it, we don't want to think about our own death. Is it almost harder? It almost seems like it's harder in the days of social media, because back in the days, let's say 30 years ago, excuse me, you just have like a notebook out in your closet or something like that, and then somebody could find all your contact information and call people. And now it's like there's all these passwords and layers, and you might have a different password for each social media account. One of my really good friends had both of his parents die within about a span of 10 or 12 months. And I saw what he went through, and fortunately he's very savvy. He set up a power of attorney. And so, but he was making trips to the bank to do, work for his mom and make sure everything was in order. And you're right. That's like the last time you want to be doing all this type of technical and tedious, errands, running around. You're grieving your parent or your friend, a spouse, whatever it is. So far I have make sure there's a will, power of attorney, kids custody taken care of, any kind of documentation, and then knowing what you want to do for the funeral, and then buried, cremated, or now composted. I like that idea. I always thought the Vikings, I think, did this. They would put you in a little canoe and they would push you into the water, and there'd be all these archers with flaming arrows, and they would shoot the canoe. I always thought that'd be just a great funeral, just the pyrotechnics and everything. But I've never written it down, so I need to write it down and put it somewhere.
You do.
Yeah. So do you recommend, do we just have like a journal, like a fancy, like a nice book that says like when I die, and then it's like in a drawer somewhere and somebody can find it, a couple of days after you pass?
It can be as simple as that. What I did as a result of doing that very first workshop was I did some more research for that workshop, and that research has become our Before I Go workbook, which is simply a workbook with all the questions in and spaces for you to answer them. So you don't have to think about what you might be missing, because if you've got all that completed, then, it's done. Because the trouble with this subject is you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
However, having said that, it can be as simple as a notebook with the various things written down. If you're not using a password manager, though, by the way, I highly recommend that. If you use online a lot, which most people do these days, and that could be LastPass or Dashlane or 1Password, because you don't then need to write all the passwords down somewhere, which you probably shouldn't be doing anyway. This is a more secure and an easier way for everybody to remember, because everybody only needs to remember one password. So I do recommend that. It is a bit more complex. And so these days, another new initiative is a thing called having a digital executor. So, with a will, you have to appoint an executor to wind up everything after you have died. You might want to, this is not a legal position, but you might want to ask somebody to be responsible for the winding up of your digital life in whatever way that is. Ideally, that would be somebody who's happy and feels comfortable with the internet and all the other bits and pieces that have to go on, especially if you've got a business, even if it's a small business or a one person business. You need to have somebody who knows what to do about that sort of thing, and who will communicate. Let's say if you had died yesterday, it's really much easier to think about if I had died yesterday than it is to think if I'm not here or something.
Tomorrow, right?
Exactly. So if you had died yesterday, who would be telling your clients? How would that be communicated to them?
Right.
It's like
everybody would. Why didn't Chris show up today? What's going on?
Exactly. And so you do need to put some things in place for that. So it could be a digital executor. It could be a person from a business point of view. It could be somebody that you in the business, maybe a colleague, that you agree to do this for each other, that you agree that you'll give access to your client's details. That would have to be approved, obviously, in the case of an eventuality where you're not around or you're not able to get in touch with them for whatever reason.
Right. Now, I'm thinking about a friend of mine who died in 2016. So it's been 6 years now. And if you go on Facebook, it looks as if he's still alive. I mean, he hasn't, nobody's posted in 6 years, but nothing's been changed on his account. Do these social media accounts have something where like your digital executor can contact the company and let them know?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about Facebook. Facebook do a thing called, I think they call it now a memorial contact. So you just Google that. It will take you to where you have to complete it on your Facebook profile. And you put in the name of the person that you authorize to take care of your account after you have died. Now, So for example, I have married again, and I have my new husband's name in there. He is fine with doing Facebook. I've given him instructions about what it is that I want to have done, which would be taking down the profile or not taking down the profile or keeping it up for a certain amount of time or whatever. But when my first husband died, he was on Facebook, and I didn't know about any of this, by the way. I had to get somebody else to do it for me, to take it down, because I couldn't bear it being up there. But then, later on in that year, we had another tragedy in our family, actually. My stepdaughter, who was 16 at the time, my step granddaughter, I should say, she was 16. She also died of cancer. I mean, really horrible. And in those days, the children, the kids that age were all using Facebook. I know they don't anymore, but at the time they were. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want my husband's page up, but her dad and her friends, they all used her profile as a kind of like memorial page. And that's what you can do as well. So, but it really helps to have somebody to have thought this through about what you would want, and then to authorize somebody to do that for you. And you can do that right now, and it only takes a few minutes. And that applies to all the social media accounts, by the way.
Nice.
The thing is, you have to do it.
The thing is, you have to do it. And like we've been saying, this is a tough thing to even wrap your mind around. What does this do for somebody like your current husband, who knows that, you know, the day that you pass, or when he passes, you guys both know that there's not going to be that added pressure of having to do all this and run around? What kind of burden does that take off your shoulders? How does that feel?
Well, often people don't realize that this is something that saps away at their energy in the background. Okay. And once you've taken care of this stuff, you can feel the relief. You can actually, I mean, relief is the main thing. Relief and peace of mind is what happens, because you know that everything's in place should you know, the unexpected happen, or the last thing that you want to have happen. So when you do this kind of work right now, this preparatory work, if you like, think of it like an insurance policy. You know, you hope it's not going to happen, but you've got everything in place just in case.
Right.
Then it does bring you relief, peace of mind. It brings your family reassurance as well, because they know that, you know, all they have to do is follow your instructions. All of that means that you release more energy to get on and live your life right now, which is really what we're interested in, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's kind of like, you know, if you're willing to face the end and face the fear of doing that, which actually, of course, is like most fears, you know, when you face them, they actually get less. But anyway, if you're willing to do that, you actually discover that you free up time to enjoy your life right now much more, which, you know, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. It's kind of an insurance plan. A couple months ago, actually, I realized this. I didn't know I was, but I was driving without insurance for about 3 weeks. And when I realized it, I called AAA, got signed up. And about a week later, I had the first accident I've ever been in that was my fault. It was just a very small fender bender in a parking lot. But I'm like, thank God I got insurance, right? Yeah. And it was on my birthday, which sucked. But I was like, wow, like a week or like 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know that I was driving around without insurance. And then I took care of it. And then this happened. Yeah. So it is like, we never know when death is going to happen for anyone, who either us or loved ones. And it is definitely something that we all need to be working on. So Jane, how does somebody get in touch with you? Or I know you have, what do you call them? Are they certified coaches, or how does somebody find somebody?
Yeah. What we do now is we train people to be end of life plan facilitators. So if you're interested in training as a facilitator, well, I'll tell you first of all why we discovered that we needed to provide facilitators, because people need help to get this done. So I can guarantee that most people listening are going to think this is a really good idea, but they're not actually going to do very much about it.
Right.
But that's completely understandable. And that's why we have our facilitators, to help people think it through and to hold them accountable, and just like a coach, really, a get it done coach, you could say. So you can find out more about that at our website, beforeigosolutions.com. And please email me, if you've got any questions, Jane at beforeigosolutions.com. But you might want to find out how prepared you are. And you can do that by doing our very short quiz. It's just 10 yes or no questions. It's at beforeigoquiz.com. And I'll be asking you questions similar, well, some of them taken from the actual workbook, some of them we've discussed today, but you will end up with a score which will tell you that you've either got nothing in place, you've got everything in place. That's very rare. Very rare do we have it. 10 out of 10 doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
but you'll at least know where you're at so that you can you can take the first step forward, using hopefully one of our, well, we have all sorts of products and programs to help people, but the very first thing might just be having a conversation with somebody that you care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm on that website, beforeigoquiz.com. And it looks, it's just a very basic website. You click on a button, take the quiz, boom, here's question number 1. It looks like there's only 10 questions. That's right. Seems very easy and straightforward, and we can get done with that very quickly. So this is great. And Jane, what was the name of your book again?
So the second book that I've published 2, the first one, Gifted by Grief, that's my memoir of that whole time when coming up to Philip dying and everything and afterwards. But I then published, or had published, I should say, Before I Go, The Essential Guide to Creating a Good End of Life Plan. And, if you're somebody who just wants to do this with as little expense as possible, get a copy of that book from Amazon, get your notebook, do the things that I invite you to do, think it all through in the book. It's all in the book. It's absolutely possible to do all this, but you do have to do it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's really no excuse, because I would imagine there's a fee if you hire the counselor or the coach, which may be a good option for a lot of people because it's somebody holding your hand, or the book. But yes, we definitely need to take that action, that initial step, right? So I encourage everybody watching this, listening to this, take that initial step, either work with somebody who Jane has certified, buy Jane's book, check it out. I think this is very important. I like the concept of insurance. It's like, nobody really wants insurance until you need it, and then you're so grateful that you have it. So again, Jane, Duncan, Rogers, Before I Go Solutions. I'm Chris Janke, and I want to thank everyone for watching the show. Jane, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Health in the Real World show. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below. Visit mycorebalance.com to learn more.